My guests today are Brian Genisio and Dennis Burton. Guys, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic.
Tell me about this project you've been working on.
So we've been working on a project called Choose Your Own Application. So it came about kind of as we were doing a whole lot of single-page applications for our clients, and we found that we use a whole lot of different technologies to solve different problems for different clients.
Let's stop right there. What's a defined single-page application?
So a single-page application, the flagship single-page application that we all saw first was probably Gmail.
Okay.
Right? It's the application that does not do a server ping back and refresh. It does everything kind of in the background. We used to call it Ajax, but that's kind of a funny term because we're not using XML or anything like that
X and
anymore.
Ajax stands
right?
for XML, but
Right.
we still use that term.
But so the term that people tend to use these days is called single-page application or asynchronous stateful client. Those are two different terms you often see for what we're really talking about is HTML, JavaScript, and CSS that doesn't do full page refreshes and just brings down the bits that it needs and displays them dynamically.
And it does that through JavaScript calling out to server-side web services.
Correct,
Right.
asynchronously.
That's what we call Ajax, which used to stand for something but no longer does.
Right. Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, so yeah, we got a definition there. So now we wanted to build a
wanted to-
single-page app using this framework of yours.
So we took a sample application that we've been presenting for quite a while. We've had it. You had it at one of your Detroit Cloud Dev Day shows where it was the node overflow talk at that time.
Okay,
where
not my
it was,
show, Dave McKinnon's show,
okay.
but I helped.
It was a talk that basically showed building an application with Backbone, with Node on the back end, and Socket.io so that every time an update happened on one browser, another browser that was connected would also receive the updates in real time.
Okay.
Taking that basic concept and expanding it out through a whole bunch of different technology stacks. So we allow the user to, as they're walking through the application in a choose your own adventure style, to select the different technologies they want to build from. So select from Backbone or Knockout on the client side as to which technology they want to use for their client side MVC. And
So not everybody knows what Choose Your Own Adventure is. What is that?
Choose Your Own Adventure was it's a fantastic series of books that I used to read as a kid that you would get to, say you'd start reading a few pages in, and down at the bottom it would give you a choice. If you want to make this choice, turn to page 7. If you want to make this choice, turn to page 40. And the book itself would have several different endings depending on how you chose to read through the book.
Okay.
Sometimes you could, die a horrible death, and sometimes you could come out with a fantastic fairy tale ending.
Your application does the same thing.
Well,
Fairy tale ending, horrible death.
Our application just allows you to build the solution in a lot of different ways.
All right.
So one of the real big advantages of that is something like Knockout or Backbone. You'll see several articles on the internet that'll talk about should we use Backbone or should we use Knockout, right? And really the two frameworks, while they're often pitted against each other, have a lot of strengths and weaknesses that are opposite of each other.
They're both JavaScript frameworks for essentially binding models to the view. Is that right?
So Knockout is much more data binding centric. It's focused on that model view model approach where you stick the data binding statements inside of your HTML, and the framework kind of takes care of marshaling data back and forth between your view models and the HTML controls that represent them. Whereas in Backbone, you do things a little bit more like you would traditionally do it in web development. You would do things through jQuery and through events, and Backbone effectively provides structure for your code and a place where everything should go.
Okay. So it's a little bit more work in Backbone.
Depending on what you're doing.
Right. For instance, with Backbone, its strength is how it synchronizes data with the backend.
Okay.
So it does an abstraction on top of the jQuery's Ajax function that makes it feel much more like a model and collection that you would be dealing with back on the server. And so you can call fetch on the client side, and it will asynchronously get all the data, parse it, and put it into your collection. You can call save, and it will asynchronously save to the server using whatever synchronization methods you have. And so where Knockout is really powerful when it comes to declarative view binding, Backbone is really powerful when it comes to data synchronization with a backend.
Okay.
And both of them provide structure, but they have very different places where they're strong.
Wow. So you've got your this choose your own application framework. It's going to choose either one or the other.
Right.
Are you helping people to decide what those strengths are?
We give a pretty short explanation of Backbone and Knockout, and we are trying not to express any particular opinion as to which one you should choose, simply because you need to see the strengths and weaknesses on your own so you know how to apply it to the problems that you run into in your applications. You know, we are building one particular application that we think has shows some of the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. So as you build up the application, you'll start choosing Backbone and Knockout. That gives you two different permutations already.
Okay. And that's just one of the steps along.
That's just one of the steps. After you've chosen Backbone and Knockout, we help you get all of that downloaded and set up inside of your application. And then the next step is to choose a language you want to implement that in. So we allow you to choose either JavaScript or CoffeeScript. So at that point, you have 4 permutations. And CoffeeScript is effectively it's a language that compiles down to JavaScript and provides a lot of nice syntax for shortening things up, gets rid of the function train syntax that is really common inside of a lot of JavaScript code. It does, however, help somebody who's not necessarily familiar with JavaScript's prototypical inheritance model to implement that correctly using the syntax that you're used to on traditional server-side languages. So you declare a class and you say this class extends another class. And all of the work that you would typically need to do to move things from the prototype of the base class into the prototype of the extended class is handled by the CoffeeScript compiler. So it provides
that, it sounds like.
It provides you certainly could. It provides a lot of nice syntax for when you're doing things with Backbone that you deal with base classes. It helps make that a little bit more concise. So, you know, at that point along the journey, we're, you know, selecting Backbone and Knockout and CoffeeScript and JavaScript. So we're up to 4 permutations already. So we didn't really stop there. So we needed this to provide the real-time synchronization from a server-side implementation. So we allow you to implement that with either Rails or Pusher, Node and a library derived from Socket.io, or ASP.NET MVC and SignalR. So at that point, you're up to the 12 permutations and a lot of different server stacks. So you can really get to see how are these, how is this problem solved across a gamut of technologies. So.
And something that's fun to see then is when you pair certain technologies together, some go together really well and some need a lot of extra work. So for instance, there's a lot of community support for Backbone and Node.js. And so in our adventure, you'll find that that combination requires 7 lines of back-end code to do the exact same thing that another path, which would be Knockout in Node.js, would take about 100 lines of code.
Oh, I see.
Because there's just a lot more plumbing code necessary because nobody's written the abstraction to make them come together.
Are there any combinations that just don't work together? If you choose this, then you've shut yourself out of this path?
Only when we get to the next step. Because then the next step after choosing your server technology is a place to deploy it. So our endpoints were Heroku and Azure Web Sites. And Azure Web Sites currently does not support Rails, and Heroku currently does not support ASP.NET MVC.
I see.
So there are a couple of paths that that you cannot complete, whereas if you're doing Node, you can deploy to either of them, and both of them are done via Git publishing. Basically the same amount of time. It takes a few minutes on either side to deploy.
So that gets us to 22 distinct permutations that are that are allowed in this adventure.
And then we're done.
Oh, well, then there's, of course, the achievements.
Achievements. Oh, you didn't say database. What's the backend database?
That's a good question. We made the choice to avoid persistence in this application. So we have you just go the easy route of in-memory persistence.
Okay.
The reason we chose that is because we're not really trying to teach you the whole stack. We kind of want to get you to a place where you deploy using a framework. The database persistence is a relatively easy extra credit, is what we call it in the adventure.
Okay.
But we chose to just do in-memory persistence for the time being, meaning the next time you restart your server, you lose it.
Right.
But that is just an exercise for the user to, in that particular framework, to do it. In all three frameworks, it's relatively easy to get database persistence.
Yeah.
It keeps it really tightly focused on the concept of single-page apps.
So this is a key point. This isn't really a tool for building production applications. This is a tool
Correct.
for learning how to use these tools and seeing how they work together, right?
That's absolutely correct.
It's a learning tool.
And that's what the achievements are for, is to encourage you to learn more. Right. What are the achievements?
And we have achievements in there for if you were doing it at CodeMash, if you were part of the launch event, for being a participant in that. We have other achievements for each of the chapters. So you've done something in Knockout and JavaScript would have an achievement. So each of those different chapters have one. And then we have some high order ones, which is really where the fun kind of comes in that we encourage testing out the different client-side frameworks. So there'll be a client framework explorer. So if you've done both Knockout and Backbone, you would get an achievement for trying out both of the client-side frameworks. We've got one for the client languages for doing CoffeeScript and JavaScript. We've got one for the server-side frameworks. I forget what the name of that one is.
I think it's just Server Framework Explorer, and then there's Cloud Explorer.
Okay.
You've explored both of the cloud options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, if people attended CodeMash, which we're in the middle of right now, one of the precompilers was you guys leading
Correct.
a group of people, which I understand the room was overflowing.
Yeah.
That was the day before I got here. But what about going forward? Is this something you're going to be traveling around with and showing off? Is it something people can just download and do on their own, or what?
We'll probably be doing some of both. It is an application that's online that anybody can get to at any time if they want to walk through the tutorial.
Where is that?
It is at ChooseYourOwnApplication.com. Anytime you go in, you just log in with your GitHub ID. That gives us something that we don't have to know your identity, but it gives us something that we can bind your achievements to and keep track of your progress. And we will probably also be doing this with other groups, presenting it in like half-day sessions. So there's a lot of value in getting stuck and being able to ask people that have gone through it before. So that will definitely be happening in the future as well.
When you guys did your half-day session, were you mostly up front showing them how to use the tool, or were you mostly just giving them a little push and letting them do it on their own and walking around helping?
We spent about 15 minutes kind of explaining why it was built, very similar to the conversations that we're having here, and kind of let them start building it, and then walked around and helped people as they got stuck.
Did you find anything among that? This is kind of a nice group of beta testers that you can take back and change them?
There's some things that we ran into that actually there were conversations that we had about placement of commas, for instance, in the JavaScript was something that came up in our beta testing even before CodeMash that we had a lot of internal conversation on, and sure enough it showed up here as well.
The syntax of JavaScript?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, JavaScript has a little funny things like that.
Right. Well, a lot of
people points out a bunch of those.
A lot of people are used to their compilers telling them that they've got their syntax wrong. But if you don't quite get it right, you're just going to get a runtime error that you have to open the console for on the client side. And so, if you're not used to that can be a little bit daunting. And so, yeah, that's some of the feedback we got. Other feedback was more about just how ideas on how to teach it.
That's what I was thinking. I think that since you guys tested it pretty well, that the syntax would be pretty rock solid, but you hadn't tested how intuitive it is to someone that wasn't used to that.
Right.
And that's what you get from a place like this. When you get
I would say.
how many people in the room?
There was about 120.
120 people in the room. That's a really good test case to see how many of them get it right off the bat. How many do you have to sit down and explain to them, and then they get it. How many just never get it?
Yeah, I would say easily the plurality of questions related to CoffeeScript. A lot of people trying CoffeeScript for the first time and not necessarily realizing the meaning of or the strictness of white space sensitive languages. So you would have somebody that would combine tabs and spaces within the same indent level, and CoffeeScript would not like that. You have to be very consistent with it. Wow. So that was something that came out.
But we do find that we can hold your hand, and you can get to where you want to go, but if we also just kind of let you struggle for a little while, most people are come back to us and say, that's what I needed to make sure I never forget my comma again.
Right.
Or that's what I needed to make sure that I always have my white space right. And it's that's the type of experience that we have also gained when we learned these technologies.
Sure.
We've all gone through it, and so I think there's a lot of value in that type of learning. Just you try it, struggle a little bit, and figure out what's going on, and move on.
Very cool. You have anything scheduled like this precompiler in the future?
Not for right now.
Okay.
We're open to it, though.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right, guys. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Dave.
it.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Be sure to have all your friends check out new technology at ChooseYourOwnApplication.com.